I still remember the wine I brought that night, a 2014 Syrah from a quiet little vineyard in Oregon, one of the first bottles I ever bought when I started learning about wine. I wrapped it in linen, tied it with twine. Something about it felt meaningful, like I was bringing a piece of myself to the table. I wore my navy sheath dress, elegant but understated, the one I always saved for important evenings, the one he liked. We were celebrating my husband's promotion, and his father had arranged a dinner at the country club. Just close family and a few partners, he said, which meant men in golf shirts pretending to like scotch and women in pearls pretending to like each other. I smiled through the small talk, placed the wine on the table like an offering, and tried not to let the discomfort show. I'd gotten good at that, being pleasant, poised, invisible, really. Then came the toast. His father stood up, silver hair slicked back like a TV anchor from the 80s. He tapped his glass and smiled that politician's smile. He started with harmless praise. My husband's dedication, his long hours, his natural leadership. I sipped water, fingers curled tightly around the glass stem. Then his tone shifted. "And let's not forget," he said, lifting his glass toward me, "our dear daughter-in-law. She certainly knew how to marry well." Polite chuckles. A few murmurs. He smiled wider. Some people mine for gold, others just marry into it. Laughter. Actual, open laughter. My husband grinned. Not nervously, not protectively, just amused. He didn't look at me. Not once. The room faded out. The sound blurred into static. I stared at my plate, the salad untouched, the fork still in my hand. My fingers trembled, barely able to hold on. I excused myself, barely getting the words out. I floated, to the bathroom. The marble was cold under my heels. I locked the stall and sat, knees tight to my chest, hands gripping my arms like I could hold myself together. It wasn't just the insult. It wasn't even the laughter. It was the fact that no one stopped it. No one saw it. I wasn't a woman. At that table, I was a prop in their performance. An accessory to my husband's success. I waited until I could breathe again, touched up my mascara like it mattered. Then I went home. Alone. That was the night I stopped being naive. Back at the house, I poured a glass of the same wine I'd brought to dinner. The bottle unopened, still wrapped in linen, forgotten on the table when we left. I wandered into his office. Maybe I was looking for a distraction. Maybe I wanted to feel like I still belonged in that house. But I opened the wrong drawer. And there, they were receipts. Dozens, transfers, invoices, contracts with his father's signature and his. Shell accounts, property shifts, assets being funneled quietly out of the business. Nothing had my name on it. Nothing was for us. It was all them. I sat on the floor, papers spread around me like fallen leaves. My dress wrinkled, my hair loose, my hands numb, and I realized I wasn't a partner, I was a placeholder, a front, a pawn, a gold digger in their story, convenient, disposable. The worst part? I hadn't even noticed it happening. We met in the campus cafe on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky is too gray to feel like spring and too warm to feel like winter. I was scribbling notes into the margins of a case study, coffee cold, beside me, when he asked if the seat was taken. It wasn't. He had quiet eyes, dark, unreadable, but kind. His voice was low, careful. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who made you feel like the most important person in the room just by choosing to be near you. He was in law school. I was finishing my MBA. We were both tired, overcaffeinated, and determined not to end up like our parents, his wealthy and disconnected, mine exhausted and scraping by. He said I made him feel alive. I said he made me feel safe. That should have told me everything. We married the year after graduation. A courthouse wedding, my mother crying quietly beside me, his parents not bothering to show. "It's not that they don't support us," he said. "They just don't know you yet." But they never wanted to. From the moment I stepped into their pristine country home for Sunday brunch, I felt it. The judgment behind every smile. The whispered exchanges when I spoke too confidently. The way his mother's eyes lingered on my shoes, my watch, the way I crossed my legs. "Ambitious," she once said, like it was an insult. "Polished," said his father with a smirk. Not one of us. I laughed it off. At first, I baked pies, remembered birthdays. I brought hostess gifts and complimented their flower arrangements. I learned the names of his uncle's dogs. I tried, desperately, to belong. Meanwhile, I let pieces of myself fall away. I sold my stake in the startup. I co-founded "It's just better to have a clean break," he said. I followed him to his city, let him pick our neighborhood, our furniture, the bank. At first, I was still consulting on the side, helping women-led startups raise capital, building pitch decks late at night while he slept. He never asked about it. When I shared a win, when one of my clients got funding, he blinked like I'd mentioned the weather. "That's nice," he said once, then added, "But don't get too overwhelmed. You already have so much on your plate." He didn't mean it cruelly. That was the worst part. It was never overt, never shouting or slamming doors. It was suggestion, tone, timing. "Do you want to be the kind of wife who's always glued to her laptop? You're just intense. In meetings, I mean. That can rub people the wrong way. Maybe wait a bit before launching anything. It's just not a great time right now." So I waited. I cut my hair. Softer, more approachable. I stopped. Wearing heels around his family. I bought beige. I learned to make lasagna from scratch. I said less in meetings. Smiled more. Took up watercolor. Each choice was small. Each one justifiable. Until one day I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized. Her blazer was traded for cardigans. Her voice, once sharp and curious, had rounded into something quieter. She looked like someone's good idea of a wife, not mine. Still, I loved him. Or maybe I loved who I thought he could be, if I just worked hard enough. Love made me patient. Hope made me foolish. Then came the dinner, the speech, the gold digger joke. And suddenly I saw it all in reverse, like rewinding a film reel. Every moment I swallowed discomfort. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. Every silence he let fall between us when I needed him to speak. They hadn't changed. I had. For them. And for what? A family that never wanted me. A man who loved me small. A life that never felt like mine. It wasn't rage that came first. It was grief. Because I realized I hadn't just lost them. I had lost me. After that dinner, something in me snapped, but not loudly. It was the kind of snap you don't hear until everything's already fallen, like the quiet crack in a foundation, long before the walls collapse. I didn't yell. I didn't confront. I investigated. Reached out to a woman I'd met years ago at a Women in Finance panel. She was a forensic accountant. Sharp as a scalpel, discreet as a priest. I told her I had a suspicion about asset manipulation. I didn't give details. She didn't ask. We met in cafes, never the same one twice. I paid her in cash and gift cards. She pulled threads I didn't even know existed. And what unraveled was worse than I had imagined. There were forms filed in my name. Insurance documents, tax liabilities, even a passive partner designation. My signature had been traced from old contracts, sloppy but intentional. I was listed, but only where it benefited them, not as an owner. Not as a shareholder, not as a decision maker, just a buffer, a shield for risk. They used me like a paper doll, and I'd let them. I sat on the edge of my bathtub, knees pressed together, papers spread out on the tile floor like crime scene photos. My wedding ring felt heavier that night, like lead. I couldn't stop looking at it. When I confronted my husband, if you can even call it that, I didn't scream. I laid the documents on his desk, waited. He looked at them, blinked, then smiled, smug. "You're reading too much into this," he said. "Your name's on them," I whispered. "For protection. It's standard practice. You should be grateful." "Grateful," I repeated, like I didn't know the meaning of the word. He shrugged. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You know how emotional you can get. You always need something to be wrong." That last line stayed with me like a splinter in the brain. He turned back to his laptop. Just turned. Like I was a child, acting out at dinner. And then, the next morning, before I could do anything, he served me divorce papers. I hadn't even said the word divorce. I hadn't even packed a bag. But he was ready, because this had never been impulsive for him. It had been a plan, an exit strategy, and I was the last box to check. The papers came with a letter from his lawyer, cold, clinical. Preemptive protection to prevent escalation or retaliation. They expected me to scream, to fight, to beg. I did none of those things, but I cried. Oh God, I cried. Not the elegant one tear down the cheek kind of crying, I sobbed into the floor of our walk-in closet, surrounded by the clothes I had tailored to his tastes. Beige, blush, cream, the safe palette of a woman who didn't want to offend. Mascara bled into the carpet. My blouse stuck to my chest from sweat. My face burned with humiliation and salt, and when I finally stood, there were handprints on the closet mirror, from where I'd tried to hold myself up. By evening, my email was deactivated. The bank locked me out of our accounts. My phone pinged with alerts. Access denied. They were fast. Faster than I thought they'd be. That night, a friend I hadn't spoken to in months, Chelsea, showed up in an old Corolla and helped me load a few suitcases and 3 boxes of books into her trunk. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a ginger ale and said, "Airbnb's clean and quiet." I stayed in that Airbnb for 6 weeks. White walls. One dusty painting of a lighthouse. A lamp with a frayed cord that buzzed when you turned it on. I'd sit on the floor and stare at the ceiling fan, listening to it click like a slow metronome while I counted ceiling cracks like constellations. The bed was too soft. The sheets smelled like bleach and borrowed time. And every night before sleep, I'd whisper to the woman in the mirror, "You gave them everything, and they gave you exile." I touched my wedding ring often, but not out of longing. I was waiting for the moment it felt meaningless. It didn't take long. I disappeared. Not in a dramatic movie-style way. No midnight flights or fake passports. I just stopped answering. No social media. No texts. No explanations. I turned off the phone that still rang with messages from his mother. Pitying or passive-aggressive. Sometimes both. I stopped checking my old email, the one with his last name in the address. I let people think what they wanted. Left the city. Took a room in a town 3 hours away, where nobody knew my name and nobody cared. My ID said Rebecca Lane. It was my middle name and my grandmother's maiden name. It felt honest in a way my married name never had. I got a job at a nonprofit that refurbished donated laptops for low-income schools. They paid me under the table for the first month. I didn't mind. I wasn't there for the money. I slept little, walked a lot. The air in that town smelled like dry pine and clean laundry. I carried a journal everywhere, filling page after page with fragments of thought, memories, numbers, names, quotes that felt like anchors. I read constantly. I lived at the local library, notebooks full of ink. I sat in the same chair by the window every morning, surrounded by case law books, tax codes, bankruptcy filings, obscure journals on corporate loopholes. That's where I met Martha, the head librarian. She was in her 60s, wore oversized sweaters and silver bangles that clinked when she moved. The first time she spoke to me, she just asked, "What are you building?" I told her I wasn't sure yet. She nodded like she understood and brought me coffee the next day. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was about resilience. The kind of strength you can't post about. The kind that grows in silence. I found out, by accident at first, that my former father-in-law's business was in trouble. It started with a headline about one of their shell companies defaulting on a loan. Then I found a quarterly report, buried in a trade publication. I traced it all the way back to their main corporation. There were gaps, liabilities disguised as assets, loans with no repayment plans, lawsuits pending. It was quiet, but it was there. Bankruptcy was circling them, like vultures. They just hadn't admitted it yet, and that's when I started planning. I bought a burner phone, registered an LLC in a different state. I called it Cobalt Vine Strategies, a nod to that old Syrah bottle I'd brought to dinner still wrapped, in linen, never opened. I opened a new savings account. Every dollar I earned went there. I cut corners, walked instead of drove, shopped secondhand, ate beans and toast more times than I could count. I didn't need comfort. I needed leverage. At night, I'd sit by the window of my small rental and look out at the quiet street. The porch light flickered sometimes, and I never bothered to fix it. It reminded me that imperfection was okay, that broken things still worked, still mattered. I stopped crying, but not because I was numb, because I'd started to see again. Myself, my power, my capacity to choose. The silence I'd once feared had become a sanctuary, a space where seeds could grow, plans could take root. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I sharpened. Because if they thought I was done, they hadn't seen anything yet. Reinvention never looks the way you think it will. There were no fireworks, no applause. Just a job posting taped to a bulletin board outside the community college. Assistant needed at local business liquidation firm. The name meant nothing to most people. But I recognized it. They handled asset auctions for mid-sized companies, many of which were failing quietly, just like my ex-in-law's firm. It paid next to nothing, but I wasn't there for the paycheck. I was there to learn. And I did. Like a sponge. I watched deals get made in parking lots and quiet back rooms. I learned how value was buried under paper trails, how numbers could lie if you didn't know where to look. I learned how desperation made people careless. I brought coffee and carried files. But in between, I read everything I could. Court records, lender agreements, strategic default tactics. I saw how companies collapsed not with a bang, but with silence. Missed filings, quiet exits, fire sales disguised as restructuring. That's when I knew his company, their company, was bleeding out. But they didn't know I was watching. Checked the auction dockets obsessively. Every week I saw the signs. A subsidiary liquidated, an asset foreclosed, a holding company dissolved. The real estate division, gutted. Their empire was crumbling, piece by piece, and I was going to buy, not in my name, of course. That would have been too obvious. So I built a net of LLCs, one tied to a silent partner in Connecticut, another linked to a dormant import business I purchased for $1. I enlisted a quiet lawyer, retired, discreet, who agreed to file, on my behalf under a blind trust. Each company was clean, each one unrelated on paper. Together, They made up the consortium that would make the bid. It took months, and every step was deliberate. By the time I walked into the auction, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored, sharp. My hair was long again, parted down the middle, no longer tied back into something safe. I wore the same perfume I used to wear before I learned to make myself smaller. Spiced rose, cardamom, something that lingered when I left the room. I sat in the back row. When my ex-father-in-law entered, I saw the confidence in his stride, the calm of a man who thought he'd gamed the system. He had no idea. The auction was clinical, no drama, just numbers. The company was being broken down and sold in lots. Warehouses, IP rights, service contracts, brand trademarks. He bid low at first, casually, like he assumed there'd be no serious competition. Then my consortium bid higher. He upped his offer. We outbid him again. Each time, his posture changed. His jaw tightened. He stopped whispering jokes to his associate. He leaned forward. His hand clenched the pen harder. By the third round, he was sweating. By the fifth, he was out. I didn't need all of it. I only needed the parts that mattered. The brand name, the final customer lists, the legacy licenses. The rest, I left on the table. When the gavel fell, it was done. The room emptied quickly. He stayed seated, stunned. I didn't plan on speaking. To him. But I couldn't resist. I walked slowly down the aisle, heels clicking on the tile like punctuation. He looked up, eyes narrowing. You, he said, like the word tasted bitter. I leaned down, calm as ever. I suppose this makes me the owner now. He said nothing. I walked out with my head high and my name clean. They had underestimated me because I'd been quiet. But they forgot. Silence can sharpen into steel. That night, I went back to the Airbnb and sat on the floor, just like I used to. I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, this time a better Syrah, one I bought myself, and I wrote in my journal. She who holds the ledger writes the ending, and I slept better than I had in years. Resurrection is never loud. It's paperwork, it's long meetings, it's early mornings and nights so quiet you forget what your own voice sounds like. After the auction, I didn't celebrate. I got to work. I kept only what was useful. The licensing contracts, the international vendor deals, the supply chain, rights that were still profitable. I sold off the vanity divisions, shut down the bloated ones, released the patents to the public domain when I didn't need them, let the rest burn. It wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. I didn't keep the company's name either. I renamed it something simpler, cleaner, no legacy attached. But I did send one final paycheck bonus to every assistant, intern, and warehouse worker who had gone unpaid or underpaid under his rule. Every single one. My lawyer said it wasn't necessary, but he never knew what it meant to be overlooked. My ex-husband wrote to me, eventually. First, a short letter, then a longer one, then a series of emails, apologies wrapped in justifications. He talked about stress, about his father's expectations, about how he never meant for things to go so far. Then came the threats, veiled at first, then overt. He accused me of stealing what was rightfully theirs. I archived them all. Never replied. After a while, he stopped trying. That, too, was a kind of silence I had earned. Months passed, and then, one afternoon, I received an invitation. A keynote speech at the State Women in Business Gala. I was stunned. Someone had submitted my name. The board voted unanimously. The invite came with gold lettering and a note in the margin. Some women break glass ceilings. You rewired the whole building. The event was held at, of all places, a country club. Not the same one as before, but close enough. Funny how life folds back in on itself like that. The night of the gala, I wore the navy dress. That dress. The one I wore to the dinner where it all started. I let it out slightly at the waist, had it cleaned, steamed, and pressed. I didn't change. A thing else. It fit differently now, not just on my body, but in my bones. That night, the air smelled of citrus and champagne. Strings played something classical but sharp beneath the clinking of crystal. I was seated near the front. Women in sleek suits and flowing gowns greeted me like an old friend. And then I saw him, standing near the bar, watching. My former father-in-law. He wasn't invited, but no one stopped him. His hair was grayer now. His shoulders slumped more, but that same cold pride lingered in his expression. He stared at me like I was a painting he couldn't make sense of. I didn't look away. The program started. The lights dimmed. My name was read aloud. Rebecca Lane, CEO, founder, strategist, survivor, applause. I walked onto the stage with heels that didn't wobble and hands that didn't shake. I looked out at the room. And I began. A few years ago, someone made a joke about me. They called me a gold digger. They said it like it was a punchline. But what they didn't know is that I wasn't looking for gold. I was building foundations. I told the story. Not all the details, just enough. About underestimation. About erasure. About walking into rooms where I was never supposed to have a voice. The truth is, we don't always get closure in neat packages. Sometimes, we get silence. Sometimes we get survival. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to reclaim the narrative. They stood when I finished. Not because I asked them to, but because they saw me now. Really saw me. And in the corner of the room, still near the bar, he was watching. Still silent. Still trying to figure out how I had done it. And I hoped, somewhere deep in that hollow place where his pride used to live, he knew. I hadn't destroyed him. He had destroyed himself. I simply walked away and did something better. When the night ended, I stood on the patio beneath a string of white lights and cool autumn air. My heels clicked softly on the stone. The perfume I wore lingered faintly, cardamom and rose. Someone asked me what I'd do next. I just smiled, because I knew. But I didn't owe anyone that answer, not anymore. As I walked toward the valet, I passed a mirror hanging near the doorway, gold-rimmed, antique. I stopped, looked at my reflection, and I whispered. He called me a gold digger. So I bought the ground he stood on. I didn't take revenge. I reclaimed my value. And finally, I felt free.